now is the time. Don't be shy. I know, Patrick, it's your first time, but it's okay.
Yes, it's my first time, and I came back to your site a few times during my studies. I just finished,
Oh,
so I'm I, I finished with the COVID situation, so I'm very deep into. I've learned the syndromes, so I've studied machocha and so on, and I decided to leave a period to learn what I'm going to apply in clinic because I'm not comfortable with the toolkit I have in my hands. Um, so when I saw what you're doing, of course, I recognize the ability to test what we're doing, the openness to what we see and what is the current knowledge in medicine. Um, and I see myself palpating, getting information, being in contact. Uh, so the current context is not facilitating that practice, but I still want to learn that approach. So I was in. Everybody is going towards Dr. Tan in Quebec because we learn the TCM syndromes more for herbs, but we don't do herbs. so it's very practical to very quick to go to the Dr. Tan direction. And um, I'm sure you know the book Applied Channel Theory from Robinson.
yes.
That is something that I'm naturally attracted to
Mm-hmm.
because it's got explanation and then it's applied in a practical way and so on. And then I've got the Japanese approach that you have and others have. So I'm at this point I'm in a slight confusion on what direction I should take. Um, um,
Welcome to the world of acupuncture.
it's the learning process that I'm trying to get because I went to school, so that's a type of learning process that I don't want to do again. I really want to learn by doing, learn by that's to make sense from my own what I feel, what I perceive. So um, um, anyway, voila. Your material, because you're giving a lot of material, so your intention is probably that practitioners develop themselves in that direction. Um, what kind of process can we go through when we have the type of basic background I have? Just in time and
All right. So, your dilemma is probably extremely common. You're not, I mean, I know you probably feel, because probably most of the people you graduated with do not necessarily feel quite the way you do, because you're clearly being attracted to something that was different than what was taught at school. So naturally, you feel like, oh, well, I'm the black sheep of the family kind of thing. So, yes, but most people still feel a certain amount of like reticence or lack of confidence in treating. At the beginning, it's bound to be like that. Some people will stay with a TCM and with, large intestine 4, liver 3, stomach 36 their whole lives, and they'll get great results or not, doesn't really matter. And they're fine with it. And some people will rebel against that and will feel like, that doesn't work for me. Either way, I think if you can, and this is where it's problematic. So you've spent X amount of years in school and a fair amount of money. And I know that Quebec is extremely regulated. So I don't know how much your school costs because I think education is better regulated, but your education post, once you're licensed in Quebec, I shouldn't say it because they invite me to teach there, so I'm not saying anything bad, don't get me wrong, but I know that everything is very expensive. Your license, your education, your units, they only accept units that are that Quebec has approved of, et cetera, et cetera. So I know, unfortunately, the way I would look at it is School, you did not go to Harvard in terms of acupuncture school. Maybe you did go to Harvard, but you know, you you didn't even go. What's the name of the university in Montreal? The English University.
McGill.
Hmm?
McGill.
McGill. You know, that's
Yeah.
another like famous. You know, the acupuncture training that we get is not of that caliber. You know, in any way, shape, or form.
I
You
know.
have to look at the education that you got as they gave you. It was not meant to teach you anything. I know it sounds absurd, and people will disagree with me, but basically what's happening is it gave you the right to sit for a licensing exam. It gave you a license. Your real learning starts now. Now, of course, you got the basics. You know, if I were to tell you what did I learn at school, you know, there's a part of me that wants to say I learned absolutely nothing. It was a total waste of time. It was, I don't use anything that I learned in school, which is, there is an aspect that's totally true. I can really say that with integrity, but it's also true that I learned where all the points are. I learned all the herbs. I don't use a lot of herbs and stuff, but I did learn something. It's not like it's just that I don't apply it on a regular basis. Now, something like Wang Zhuyi obviously has a much stronger affinity to TCM. Wang Zhuyi was a TCM practitioner, um, and he appeals to the TCM crowd. Um, Tan, of course, is Tan or Dong, either one kind of thing, depending on you know, that you can, you know, they are different, obviously, but they're both Taiwanese schools. They're somewhat related schools. And actually they're not somewhat related, they're highly related. They have very similar ideas and stuff. Um, those are very appealing to TCM if your training is TCM, because you don't have to, you're basically saying TCM is TCM, and in acupuncture, as Richard Tan used to like to say, diagnose acupuncture way. Which channel? And then you do like you math on the opposite channel or whatever, the balancing channel, you know, that's why it's called the balance method. You can balance it 5 different ways or whatever. And, but it's, to me, that's still theoretical. Okay, for me. So if your affinity is that you happen to like palpating and you like more further inquiry, then the style that I offer happens to work for you. So when you say, is my intention to promote people's growth in this direction? No, no, it's a very, yes and no. My intention is to promote people's growth. If it happens to be in the direction of what I do, that's very nice. But it's not up to me, because this style of palpating and confirming on constantly is something that certain people are going to like and some people will not. If you're someone who doesn't like hands-on stuff, if you like more theory and you don't like actually using your hands, this style probably won't work for you. Not the way I do it. There are people who do this style pure with very little palpation. It really does. It can happen. And in fact, what you might call my grandfather teacher. Okay, so I learned this, we can say, from Kiko Matsumoto. Kiko supposedly was bringing Nagano's teachings at the time, although there were other people like Kawai. Nagano was not a palpator. Nagano did everything by pulse, or most things by pulse. So there's many ways to do things. Okay, so I don't mind, and I tell people often. I tell people, first of all, one of the things I show people, if you know, as you know, there's lots of videos that, you know, I show this often in classes. You can clear the abdomen in 2 seconds flat, and it doesn't mean anything. Okay, because all you have to do is bring the knees to the chest and stretch the fascia of the abdomen, and then nothing shows. Does it mean the treatment is over? You didn't do any needles. It doesn't mean anything. The abdomen is not God. The abdomen is not the Bible. The abdomen is a tool to confirm what you think might be going on, and then to confirm if you're, quote unquote, attacking the problem in a way that's useful. If the abdominal findings are changing when you're pressing a point, it suggests, it's not 100%, but it suggests that this point is good for this person. And then there's many ways to differentiate it further. So, for example, if somebody shows what we call adrenal, which is below kidney 16, okay, on the navel, both sides, and you press, say, kidney 6, and it clears the adrenal reflex, okay, you know this point cleared adrenal. Well, it's supposed to by dogma. Okay, there's no big deal. But if, let's say, you found that they have adrenal and they also have, say, REN17, which let's say we call anxiety reflex, and kidney 6 releases not just the adrenal reflex, but it releases the REN17, or it releases something in the neck, or it releases something in the nose, it releases something in the finger. Actually, it has an affinity to fingers, so it's not maybe fair. But if it releases something that's not associated with it by dogma, that's when you're going, this point really is good for this person, because what's happening, you're now making the assumption and the adrenal issue is at the base of the problem. I'm addressing the base of the problem. It then releases the roots that are the current, whatever the other thing is. So you're saying, whereas, for example, if I needled, I released REN17 with, say, spleen 3 and pericardium 4, I'm just making stuff up a little bit, but it doesn't release anything else in the abdomen, you can say, yeah, according to the abdomen, they have REN17. They should get this point combination, but it's not effective for them. So what the palpation gives you is a way to check whether the point is useful and how useful it is. So that's very attractive for me. A lot of people, it's very unattractive too, for a number of reasons. First of all, it takes a little bit longer, especially when you're not used to it. Secondly, it takes all your power away. What happens when you can't release the abdomen and the patient expects you to release the abdomen? You basically created doubt in the patient's mind. So you have to be able to hold that space and accept that sometimes you can't clear the abdomen and you have to bullshit your way through this and make the patient, because placebo is very important. The patient does need to trust you. So if you're creating a situation where their trust is, on the one hand, when you palpate abdomen and you clear it, the patient goes, wow, I can see this ship's working, kind of thing. Okay, they really like that. It gives them confidence. But then what happens when it doesn't work? Okay. Then you kind of pickled yourself a little bit. You put yourself in an uncomfortable situation that you basically eroded the patient's confidence. If you're a sensitive person, you might lose face in front of the patient. So you really need to kind of figure out who you are relative to how you're working and what's comfortable for you. So what I try and do is promote people's growth in whatever way they can. So for example, I have a bunch of videos that are fairly philosophical by nature on point names and stuff like that. So yeah, I fully acknowledge that I am very much a person who palpates and confirms things by palpation, but it's not the only way to work. I also acknowledge that if you talk to me about spleen Qi deficiency and spleen dampness and liver yang rising, it's not quite my language. I sort of remember something. It's been 30 years, since I was in school. So I kind of know what it means, but it's not useful to me. I let people say whatever they say, and I'm like, whatever, yeah. And then I try and translate it into something where there's common ground that we both understand, and but it doesn't mean that a person who uses the TCM terms, is not a good practitioner or that they can't grow. Okay? So my purpose is simply to open people up to as many options as possible, to realize that there is whatever dogma we're indoctrinated in is just one dogma. And I don't care if it's my dogma or someone else's dogma. So my purpose is really to give people as many options and ways of looking at things and ways of being creative. And so of course it's very difficult because everybody wants to be creative, but at the same time you can't be creative without having enough dogma under your belt. You need the basics in order to play. So it's always an interesting game how to do this. Um, I would say that for a beginner in this style, this is possibly not the best time to start. I don't know because I'm not doing it. But of course, if you're trying to minimize the amount of time you're in the room with someone, and trying to palpate and taking a long time to do it is just like, I mean, touching people is not a problem. They're not shedding virus. As far as we know, touching them, because you're going to touch them regardless. Whether you're taking the pulse or needling, you wash your hands afterwards, and that the touching is not the problem. I think it's the amount of time you're spending. And as a beginner, you're going to spend a fair amount of time. This is the biggest complaint that most people have about the style. It takes that much longer to treat a patient. And the answer is yes. The first 3 months, sometimes maybe 6 months, will take you a lot longer. You have to accept that. Then you can treat a person in 5 minutes, literally. It's totally possible. Now, another thing, you may not want to do a lot of direct moxa, for example, right now. That is somewhat time consuming. It's not as time consuming as people make it out to be, but it is. It does take some time. And right now, I'll do 2 points per patient. I won't do 4, 5, 8 points. I'll just do 2. And sometimes I won't do any. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. People still get better without doing direct moxa. It's fine. Because again, you're spending more time. Now, another way to look at it, and I don't know what your options are, but if you could maybe treat outside. And no, I mean, seriously, and then it's just a whole way of operating. What happens if people started, when the community clinic started 20 years ago, it was like this radical idea. I remember writing an article about doing community clinics before they started, and then so they all like this article that I, like as if I invented something new. There was nothing new about it. Now, but they all chose to do armchairs. Okay. Now, look, how radical would it be if you took 4 treatment tables and set them up in a parking lot and allowed people to lie down in the middle of, I don't know where in Montreal you are, but it's like that would be kind of, there's this opera, there's a plaza by the opera, and a big shopping center and stuff. It's right in the middle of town, and it's kind of close to Chinatown too. I mean, and I've seen like they've had jazz festivals and things like that. That would be kind of an interesting phenomenon. You can get huge amounts of experience doing stuff like that. And whether people leave $10 in the box or they don't is almost irrelevant, because the exposure that you get becomes something that's worthwhile doing. So there's ways to be creative around it, if you want. Now, there are people in Montreal. I don't remember Alice's last name, but I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. You're on mute, Patrick.
Alice Granger.
I believe so, but she studied with Kiko for many years, and she has there are a lot of people who study with her in Montreal. And there's someone else, Raphael Caron, I think is his name. I don't know what kind of clinic either one of them runs, but I mean, I teach in Montreal, regularly. I didn't this year because of Corona. So, it wasn't an option. I will be there next September, but there's plenty of options. I would say the biggest thing that I personally, when I left school, when I was in school already, I was a little bit like you. I looked at the practitioners and I went, the clinicians in the school, and I went, what the hell's going on here? This is rubbish. People now in school, it's an extra problem because what is, you well know, in schools we have a lot of people with so-called Shen disturbance. Okay, a lot of the patients are classified as Shen disturbance, whether because they come from anxiety, insomnia, depression, stuff like that, or because what happens in the schools, I don't know what it's like in Quebec, but in the States, people come to the schools, they're often people with less money. They want treatments and they want to be able to pay less. So it attracts, and the schools, of course, want them to keep coming. They need bodies to practice on. So it creates this situation where patients basically don't get better in the school clinics. Very commonly, it's you see the same people coming week after week after week for a year. And you go, how's your knee? Oh, it's a little bit better. But, so you're not seeing a lot of clinical results in the clinic in schools, which is really a pity, but it's just the nature of it. Now, it's not 100% like that, but it's fairly common. Now, I looked at that, and then I also looked practitioners, like theoretically, we, the acupuncturists, are supposed to be the people who are touching the patient. The doctors don't touch them, the nurses don't touch them, we touch them. And then I went, but you don't touch them either. You take the pulse, but you don't touch them. Like there's this idea. Now I understand that we spend more time with them, and yes, but if we're using the word touch, that was not the correct word. So I asked the clinicians, I said, do you practice the same way in your private clinic as you practice here in the school? And they went, yes, of course. Like, they didn't understand. Why would I think that they wouldn't? And I was, well, because you're saying one thing, but I'm observing you do something else. There's a disconnect for me. And I just basically started, I was in San Francisco. This was 1990. And I just went to everyone who had a big name in San Francisco, which had a lot of, people doing acupuncture and with big names and stuff, and studied with everyone I could. And went to the clinic and hang out in their clinics. And some people I just, after one or two times, I was like, oh, you're bullshitter, I'm not interested, whatever. But there were some people I stayed with for like 1 or 2 years. And then I was also very lucky because when I left school, I worked in Silicon Valley before I was in acupuncture school. So I was very lucky that I wasn't desperate financially after acupuncture school. So I basically went to every class I possibly could for about 3 or 4 years. Literally any class that existed in acupuncture, at least in San Francisco, I went to because I wanted to see what the world was like. And then very early on, I met both Kiko and Jeffrey Yuan. So I kind of got split away from the dogmatic approach of TCM into other dogmas, granted, but at least it opened me up for other options. So that's what I would recommend to people to do. Go study as much as you can, hang out in people's clinics and see what they do. You don't need to learn, sometimes you don't need to learn anything from anyone. You don't need to know, use this point for this. You'll figure it out. Sometimes, I'll say certainly about Jeffrey, to watch Jeffrey with another person as a patient is very valuable. He has an uncanny capacity of relating to people. Now, I will say that about most of the successful practitioners that I worked with. Sometimes I wouldn't do anything like Miriam Lee. I don't do anything technically that looks like Miriam's at all. I cannot do, if you say to me, use this point, doctor, this is a tongue point, great for blah, 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 blah. I use it and it does nothing. Useless, totally useless for me. Now, Miriam used to say, people would come to her and say, oh, how come I use this point and it doesn't do it? It's supposed to be the greatest point for blah, blah, blah. And Miriam would say, your needles are too thin. Now, this is 30 years ago. Miriam never saw a needle that was less than 2 inches long. She just didn't have that in her vocabulary. Not half inch, not 1 inch, not 1.5 inch. 2 inches was her standard, and then longer. Okay, and they were thick, and she autoclaved them, and they were rusty. Because, you're autoclaving, it's got, and she was rough. Okay. For that style, part of the idea of the balance method, now I don't want to pretend that I know anything about the balance method, but my understanding from study with Miriam and whatever, part of the balance is it's yin yang. So if the problem is on the left, treat on the right. If the problem is above, treat below. That's like a basic principle. Yin, treat the yin for the yang for the yin, balance the yin and the yang, which means that ideally you're going to the furthest point away from the problem. If I have a problem in my thumb here, my left thumb, I go to my right big toe. That, reflecting, but it's the furthest away and the most opposite yin yang that I can do it to balance it. Miriam's understanding was, well, if you use a thin needle, how's the stimulation going to reach all the way out there? So you had to really stimulate the point in order to get it to where you wanted it, because you're not treating close. Now, I don't necessarily agree with it because I can see results with very little, but all I can say is that when I use the tongue points, nothing happens. It's like useless. And every so often I'll talk to friends of mine and they say, oh, Avi, you should use this. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to try. And I try it and I'm like, God, what a waste. Why don't I learn that this is not something that works? It works for the other people. It doesn't work for me. So you just have to find what it is that works for you. But the thing is, no matter whether it works for you or not, looking at the way people approach a patient, and I mean that both as a personal thing and as well as a technical thing in terms of how are they thinking? So I followed Kiko for a good part of 10 years and constantly. I mean, there was never a class with Kiko in the 90s that I wasn't there at the table doing the moxa, because I wanted to see everything she did. Sometimes, and at some point, obviously, as you can imagine, as with anyone, I knew exactly what she was going to do. It was, there's a point where, the teacher has exhausted their repertoire. There's not going to be, there's always something new, but it was always interesting for me to see what happens when the patient doesn't respond. What is she going to do? That was always more interesting for me. Once you know the dogma, at the beginning it doesn't matter. At the beginning you're upset that the patient doesn't respond because you can't learn from it. But the truth is you learn the most from failure. And you learn from another practitioner, seeing how they handle, what are they doing when something didn't work, how their brain starts to get triggered by different ideas. Where are they getting their ideas from? What are they doing in order to stimulate some new ideas? So having a teacher sometimes is not so much about the information as much as about the attitude. So that's why you can go to a chiropractor and learn from them and apply it to acupuncture. It doesn't really matter. So my suggestion is just go and hang out with people whoever you can. And Montreal has lots of practitioners, so shouldn't be that hard, although I know that the timing right now is difficult. And Miriam used to say the same thing also. Treat as many people as you possibly can. Don't worry about, yes, you should worry about results, but don't worry about money. There's a certain point, no, because in your first year in practice, your chances of making money are pretty minimal. That's just a reality, So what can you do to treat people? And if it has to be, in the park, that's good. People teach Tai Chi in the park. Why can't you do acupuncture in the park? Now, of course, come October in Montreal, it's a little bit harder, granted, but you can do it with fur coats on.
Or if you were in Ireland, Abby.
Yes, well, everyone, we have to figure out, well, but right now you could probably do something outside, couldn't you? If you wanted to. It's too cold still?
Yeah, it is really. Yeah, it's very changeable as well,
Yeah,
it's,
yeah. No, listen, you can also open it. You say you can declare that I'm out in the park on Mondays and Wednesdays, and then every Monday and Wednesday it's going to rain. You know, of course, there's limits to what you can do, but I would. All I'm saying is that there's a lot of um, possible creative ways to treat people, and and get what you need out of it, and give something to people at the same time. That's all I'm saying. And I think that every generation of practitioner is going to have to invent their own way of working, because the way of working of my generation is no longer valid. I mean, yeah, some people do it that way, but it's like 30 years ago. Now, this was in California, so acupuncture was already well known, but it was somewhat saturated, but it wasn't totally saturated. But 10 years later, it was totally saturated. So it's extremely hard. So a beginning practitioner now is facing a very different world than I was facing. Okay, so creating a business now needs, and that's why the community clinics got started, because that was a different business model than private clinics with private rooms. Different overhead, different way of reaching out, different crowd that you can reach out, different capacity of creating things. And it created its own set of etiquette, and as well as problems. And for example, they're a little bit, some of the community clinics find it harder to open now, because if they're not flexible and they can't go outside, or whatever, it's a little harder for them. So I think you just have to accept that acupuncture there's no one way to do it. There's 20 zillion ways to do acupuncture. And you have to find a way that's going to work for you, whatever that is. I don't know if that was helpful, Patrick, but
it was extremely helpful, and you touched on other questions I had, because I read that you were involved in community clinics, and so you touched it. So yes, and you came back to the basics, the basis, which is, and you said it the right way. I obtained a license to practice. And when you came up with working outside, this is something that I was thinking about for elderly, because here they closed down completely. The people were like in a prison. So and the regulation makes it that if you want to do tele consultations, you have to see them first in person. So one idea I had was to see the maximum number of those people who are at risk of being shut down again, so that I can support them distance during the winter. So the idea was to be under a canopy. I think that's how you call that. So to be able to have a schedule and bring other acupuncturist with me to have a maximum interaction with them, because it's going to be safe. And I wanted to have the owners of these are big owners. They own this is major real estate, and it's highly profitable, to give the first consultation, because they're trying to help their clientele, so that they're not too scared, they don't leave. So it's fantastic that in our first interaction, it's a bit like if you were in my mind. So it was extremely useful.
Good. And I think, the canopy or the tent idea is a wonderful idea. I would say, so one of the things that I would suggest, which I think, my so-called involvement in community clinics has been primarily as a theoretician, has not been, I haven't really, I have started a community clinic at one point here in Portsmouth. And it was actually, it's kind of funny. The community acupuncture organization didn't approve of it, because I had I had a very large room, huge, that was also used as a meditation hall, and you can have treatments. And I also had 2 private rooms, and because I had private rooms, it was not according to the dogma of the organization.
Of POCA, yes, they're very, very. It's like McDonald's.
Yeah, it was
yes.
very funny. I was like, you've got to be kidding me, but whatever. Anyway, but the fear, just so that you know what it, so there was this article that was written sometime in the 90s. And actually, the article was really taken from an idea that my teacher Thich Nhat Hanh came up with, was to undo the separation between practitioners and patients, and to allow community, not acupuncture, to allow community to be the major component of healing, because isolation is such a strong component in our culture. So what would happen if acupuncture clinics became community centers where people drop in for tea or for conversation or for meditation or for whatever? And there's also acupuncture as a, something that happens. And where, when we say, this is something community clinics did pick up very clearly, that when we treat in private rooms, we say that we're working with energy, with chi. In a small room, where the hell is the chi going? Whereas in a larger room with many people, the chi can flow better. Also, Miriam had nine beds in a one-bedroom apartment, a basement apartment, with curtains between the, very Chinese. And it was bare, you could, between the curtain, you could get the treatment table, and you could barely stand there. There was so little distance between the curtain and the bed now. And of course, on the other side of the bed, the curtain was on the bed. So there was the bed and maybe like half a meter extra space for you to be able to needle the person, and then you close the curtain and move to the other person. But everybody could hear everything that was going on everywhere. And sometimes she would tell people she'd put needles in and tell them to walk and see how it feels. It has something, it motivates people because they're hearing, they're getting better. Oh, I should get better too. This separating people is not always such a good idea. So, we talk a lot about confidentiality, and it's such a high value, and I get it. And I'm not saying that yes, there are times when confidentiality is very important, but sometimes confidentiality is a group thing, not an individual thing. Because what we're saying, when we're saying, I'm keeping this confidential, I'm saying there's something really fucked up with you and nobody should know your secret. Of course, we're not saying it like that, but there's an implication about that. If you need to keep it confidential, it suggests that there's something negative about it. So by opening up everything, we're allowing something else to happen. And yes, at that point, some of the interactions are a little bit different. How do you interact with people where sometimes you cannot really penetrate the individual in public? That's not always appropriate. Fine, that's okay. But you also learn to be able to do that in spite of that in public. In spite of the fact that it's you're doing something very private, very publicly, without differentiating. So I think there's a lot of power in that. And I'd say the other thing that I think that newer practitioners should consider is working together, pooling their resources together. And I don't mean opening clinics together. When we open clinics together, basically we're each renting space. I mean, what happens in a clinic where a patient doesn't belong to me, doesn't belong to you? Mm-hmm. And everybody gets paid according to the number of hours they're contributing, whether it's for acupuncture or answering the phone or cleaning or teaching or reaching out to doctors or whatever it is. So we're eliminating the competition within the clinic, within our group. And we each have, it's not just financial resources. Listen, someone in the group is very good with websites. Someone in the group is very good with reaching out to MDs or whatever. Someone in the group is really good with community relations. It's like not everybody's forte is treatment. The problem is we all want to treat. We don't want to do the other stuff. So how do we create a situation where each person can contribute to the aliveness of the clinic, and still treat, of course, because otherwise, then it becomes you're hiring a public relations person or something, education person, or so it's not quite like that. But we can really share and acknowledge the strengths of each other and work together non-competitively. We are generally working individually, even when we work with each other, and we're working competitively. And I think that era, that mode, which was the mode I was brought up on, is not going to be as valid. It's not going to work as well for the generation that's coming now, because there's just too many acupuncturists in comparison to the need for this style of one-on-one individual closed room demand. There just isn't a demand on it, but there is a demand for healthcare. There is a demand for healing. There is a demand for community building. There is demand for more things. The thing that I feel regret about is that the people who are implementing these are generally people who are doing very primitive, acupuncture. It's the nada, the acupuncturists without borders. Those are the people who are taking these ideas and implementing them. But technically, what they're doing is like so boring, like so not what I want to do. So for me, the challenge is, how does one do something more complex technically, but in those environments? And I don't have the answer. Well, not in the environment that I'm in, but and I'm not saying that it can work. I don't know, but that's where I would like to explore what the options are. Because we've explored the option of the so-called primitive acupuncture in community setting. We know that can work in that, and that now we have to explore more. There's more exploration, because otherwise we're treading the same water. Mm-hmm. So those are my ideas.
And POCA is succeeding.
Sorry?
POCA, they're succeeding. The association that you were part of, or that was finding that your rooms were not as the standard, they're succeeding big. I mean, they're treating and they're teaching and so on. In Quebec, we just managed to open up a school clinic with NADA only, that was not following the regulation at all. It was totally against the regulation. We are not allowed to treat people in the same room. They have to be full barriers. They can be made of, sometimes it's acceptable being, so we were totally not respecting the regulation. And it was a bit dangerous for the acupuncturists that the students, I was managing a school 1 year, the students are hiring acupuncturists, so they were exposed. So I got the school to commit to protect us, and they had the discussion, the solid discussion with it's called Order of Acupuncturists in. And now this week we are doing the first outside of the school with a doctor in Trois-Rivières. It's a small city between Quebec and Montreal. He's a PhD in community health and so on. So we are starting with NADA only, but it's a pilot project approved by the board of directors of the controlling body in Quebec. So, and we are finishing a memoir. They have to be fed with a lot of paper on moving from that to full acupuncture with many people in one room. So it's a very, very slow process, but we're pushing the regulator, and we wanted to do it for the doctors and the nurse and the people working in hospitals in the COVID context, in the parkings and the around there, and it got final approval, and then it was shut down by the municipality's public health. We didn't even knew they existed. So we are moving in that direction of opening up and serving. But in Quebec, they are. There's a shortage of acupuncturists because the course is, because there's only one school, and because it's they've not limited really, but it's too difficult. It's very, very difficult
Yes.
on all levels. You use a lot of energy and you don't. Anyway, it's so we are in a context that is still easier to start a practice.
Good. No, I think that's wonderful. I think this is how things have to start moving. Because the old, I mean, yes, the Quebec regulations are quite stringent. I think that, when I go teach there, they always keep telling me, and they tell me, make sure you have a alkalized cotton in one hand so you can swipe the points. I'm like, nobody swipes points anymore. It's like it's an old-fashioned idea. Nobody cares about alkalizing points. But I know that I have to do that, and everything has to look a certain way.
But you're welcome. You have to know that the president who was there since the beginning, yes, now there's a woman, and she's also a coach by training. So she's much more. She's different, and it's the beginning of a change.
Yeah.
And Monsieur Raymond Bourret, the former president, is fully involved in Qigong, so he's extremely happy. Things are really where they. It's a big improvement. So I feel completely welcome to come here.
Oh, no, of course. I mean, I do, but the thing that I think that the Quebec regulations demonstrate is what happened because it was open. The licensing in Quebec was the first licensing in Canada, and it was very, very early on. In fact, acupuncture in North America probably started in Montreal.
Mm-hmm. With Wixu, Mario, the Wixu family.
I don't know that, but I know that people from New York City in the 70s came from Montreal and, started like these Marxist people's clinics.
Yes.
And that's what started Lincoln Hospital also.
Yes.
So a lot of, so you guys were much earlier, and this whole notion of looking, was very important to make it so that that you're not going to be suspected of being like dirty Marxists, schleppers, that it all is medically appropriate and and then they make up all these ridiculous regulations that are irrelevant. But that's what in the 70s people thought was needed, and maybe they were right. We don't know. It wasn't my battle. And once you have that, and in Canada there was no licensing at all for anyone, so the fact that Quebec even had licensing was a huge deal. Now all the other provinces have licensing, but so just to accept the history of it and understand the usefulness of it, as well as, okay, now it's time to shift it. And of course it's always very difficult to shift it once, and the order, because I know a teeny bit about it, not much, but the order has people who work there and they're used to doing certain things a certain way, and it's basically a government agency.
Yes.
So it's not so easy to shift. And in the United States it's the same, you have the NCCAOM and you have the acupuncture boards. In a place like California, you have an acupuncture board with 10, 12 people more maybe working in that board. In New Hampshire, you have someone who's part-time, who's responsible for 5 different things, probably the acupuncturists and the hairdressers or something, I don't know. But it's always hard. The bureaucracy is always does not move easily. The only way to move them, generally speaking, you cannot convince them by talking to them, because I'm not trying to say that they're not nice. It's just that the way to convince them is with results.
Yes.
It's when you say, look, look how people like this. And, you know, when they see that the public is supporting something, that's when they can support you. So it's a really big problem. How do you create a situation where the public says, we don't want divisions between the treatment tables? You
They
know,
don't know.
if
It
it's
doesn't
not,
exist.
yeah, exactly. So it's very, very, it's always very hard. How do you change? How does a system get changed? So you got yourself right in the midst of it. So good luck. No,
Thank you.
it's an exciting place to be. It's a very good place to be.
Mm.
You know, you have, and you know, sometimes those places are how you become technically better. It's a two-edged sword. Being involved in these exciting projects that require a lot of community involvement and negotiations and trailblazing can make you concentrate just on the trailblazing, and then the technique flies out the window because it doesn't matter. It's like, who cares what the technique is, you know, because I'm dealing with the politics and the community. And sometimes because you're doing that and you're trailblazing, then all these people who have technique, you know, are interested in somehow being part of your project in some manner or another, even say as consultants or whatever, you know, and then you have the ability to extract from them the best in them technically. So how do you find the balance to be a trailblazer and use that to to make yourself better technically, to create a better platform acupuncture wise, you know, because it's a great opportunity. It really is, you know. And yes, it does have a little bit of danger of moving in only one direction. I don't know if that's helpful.
A lot again. Thank you
Wonderful.
very much.
So, all right.
So, Patrick,
Yes.
I just wanted to add quickly that I'm not so long out of training school either, and I have a kind of a small practice, but I found it very difficult as well in the beginning to kind of make sense of TCM principles and that. And just wanted to let you know that since I started working more in Avi style, that I definitely have had much better results and much better feedback from patients. And, and also all the material you've made available at Avi online has been really helpful. Lectures, etc., and personal answers to personal queries and that. So I definitely think it's style worth trying.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and one of the things that Mary Jo is saying, so I am always available to answer people's questions by emails or whatever. I'm always here to support in whatever manner I can. You know, sometimes my support is useless, but I'm trying. So if you have questions or whatever, always feel free to email me or whatever. I'm very happy to help. I mean, one of the things that this field is lacking is mentorship. So I do the best I can to offer what I can, because other fields usually, even chiropractors or naturopaths, they can get you know, they can work in someone else's clinic for a while. You know, they're an associate or whatever. So at least they get some support. And certainly, if you're in other fields, you know, like the MDs, they work in you know, you work in a hospital. You know, you generally work under someone else. You get support, you get training past school. With us, for some reason, there's this weird understanding. You went to school, you got your license, and you're on your own. So that's another thing that I think, you know, would be very nice if that got changed, to give people opportunities to both learn and work and make money. You know, in ways that don't necessitate them opening a clinic on their own. You know, I think that's too big
Step.
a burden at the beginning. And not everybody wants to. It's not something that, it's true that most people go to acupuncture school tend to be individualistic. It's true. But not everyone, and also even if you are an individualistic, we're all individuals, but it doesn't always mean that you want to work that way. So I think sometimes, and also especially now during COVID, we're all seeing how difficult it is that we have no peers at work. We have peers, but we don't have, most people, they go to work and, whatever the proverbial coffee, the water fountain and the coffee, whatever thing that people go to, that people socialize in, and, they make dates with each other or whatever, give advice to. We don't have that. The only people we see at work are people who are definitely not our peers, and that there's a very strong understanding of distance, confidentiality, blah, blah. We don't have friends at work. So, here comes COVID, and we're recognizing that we're isolated. So what would happen if we started to envision new formats in which we can work that will support us and support acupuncture in general in different ways? And like I said, I don't have answers, but at least I've got questions. You got to start somewhere.
I think you're very correct there, Evie. There's no support once you leave school,
Yeah.
and certainly here, when I finished school, I sat down and took all the names and numbers of all the acupuncturists that were in the closest city to me now, which is still a pretty small city. And I went on a mission one day to actually call to everyone, and ask for, could I do some clinical experience with them? And I didn't have one positive from that. And eventually I did get to work with one for a very short length of time, just a few days, 1 week. But other than that, it's really hard to, well, at least here, to even get that little bit of clinical experience.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And that's why I try and I put out as much as I can to help people so they can learn on their own. And yeah, because once you finish school, there are study opportunities, but often they cost a lot of money, which means that people just finish school and they're in debt. They don't have the luxury to go and take lots of classes.
And my body, I don't want to go in a class setup for a moment.
Well, no, of course.
Not because of COVID, because of what I just went through.
Right, you've been traumatized.
Exactly. I want to learn the way I used to learn. It's faster and it's.
But there are many people. Wait. Oh, okay, hold on. But as you know, like there are people like me who don't teach, like with a blackboard and theory only. There are people who are teaching by showing you a patient and treating patients. Now, when I teach, I do 1 hour lecture, or I say, I don't know what I really do. Maybe I don't do it exactly that way, but people ask me, well, how do you do it? And when I fill out the papers for the order, it's always a little hard, to explain exactly, as I sort of bullshit a little bit, but basically, I prepare a small lecture, and everything else is from the patient. Whatever the patient comes, that becomes the lecture. So yeah, I understand you don't want to go to a class, what we call Chinese style, where, they basically they have a nice lecture and maybe not so nice lecture depending, and it's all, they're reading a lecture to you. It's like, that's good for 15 minutes. It's afterwards you lose interest. The best people, I've seen some incredible people. I personally can take, if they're really good, I can take it for an hour. But a whole day? I can't sit there a whole day like listening to them, as interesting as they are. Now, it's if they start talking about, patients and stuff, then it's a little better, But I want to see. You know, it's like, I don't have to do it, but I want to see,
The same.
you know. So, but everyone's different. Some people, I know that some people get very frustrated when I teach. It's like too much stimulation. They just want the theory. They want, like, for this you do this, for this you do this. They want a very square presentation, and they can assimilate it, and then they go and make something out of it themselves. It's not like they're wrong. It's just the brain works differently. They don't do well in an environment that skips around. You know, I always tell people, I don't teach ABC. Children don't learn to speak by learning the ABC. Children learn to speak by hearing people around them talk. And eventually they go gaga, mama, and then it becomes sentences. But if you try and teach a 2-year-old A, B, C, that child is never going to speak. I can't imagine. Or you say to them, this is a subject, this is an object, this is a verb. It's like, what? Nobody speaks subject, object, verb. We just speak, and it happens to sound like that. So I try and teach a little bit, yes, you have to give people ABC a little bit, because otherwise because we're not 6 months old anymore. So we're not so comfortable with the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
But a little bit of chaos is okay. But for some people, I know people come to my classes, for example, and they go, it's too, just tell me what to do. A, B, C. And then in my clinic, I will make my own sentences. And I'm like, maybe, but probably not. So I don't know. I don't want to impose. Go ahead.
I'm even more interested in understanding, how do you think? That's why I'd rather read a book or read a few books before, and then not be overwhelmed by what's happening, but flow with it. Just because there's some, for me, that's the best setup. Reading, and in that direction, that's the only the books. I only saw a few books. The Manaka book, the Chasing the Dragon's Tail, the Meridian Therapy from Den May or something. And they're difficult to find. Like they're out of print almost, or out of stock, and so on. And also, I saw the clinical book of Matsumoto, that are a bit more expensive and slightly more expensive. But and I was wondering, what's a good start, because I really like books, but Manaka, I mean, I'm an engineer by training, so also there's some of the exploration that I find very very interesting in the methodology. Even if I don't use it, it's like history. It's like you did that, and then anyway, are there books that are? I mean, are these the only books, or are there? I don't want to put pressure on you by making a recommendation, but just ideas.
No, it's okay. I understand. I will say this. This is in fairness, I find most of the books pretty useless. I will say that if you wanted a book, kind of like for some survey, and they're still cheaper. So there are 2 books by, not the clinical strategies. Some people say that they're totally essential for them. I had them at one point, and then, the only time I open them is when people ask me a question. They say, but Kiko says blah, 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 blah. And I'm opening the book and saying, you're misunderstanding what it says, in my opinion. No, that it's sometimes, it's written in a way, sometimes it's hard to know what's the main strategy and what is supporting strategy. So people start, because if they're not clear about it. But, and you're right, they are expensive. It's true. They're $125 each, or maybe more, I'm not sure. But they're not cheap books. Chasing the Dragon Tail is a much cheaper book. I do have it. I've read sections of it. 2 books that I would recommend, just for not so much for practical, is, again, this is Stephen Birch and Kiko Matsumoto. They 8 Extraordinary Meridian and Hara Diagnosis, Reflection on the Sea. Not because that reflects anything that Kiko has, that does not reflect what she's been doing since at least 1990. It's not what she does, but it gives you some view, and it will give you some view of the Monica stuff. And, you know, and you don't have to read every paragraph, and you don't, you know, you can just, but it will give you some overview of some of the things that kind of might have come into the style. Ikeda has had a book, I believe, which I did not find very useful. This is a style that's hard to, you know, because it's not theoretical, and a lot of the Japanese styles, even if they're not palpatory in the abdomen, they're very much about, you know, the Japanese are very much about the 10-year training. Okay, so and it's an interesting phenomenon. So you go and you want to become a trumpeter, okay, in Japan. You go for 10 years before you become a trumpeter, before you get the certificate from the sensei, you are a trumpeter. So the first year, you're not allowed to do anything. You just watch the sensei, and you serve sensei dinner. The next year, you're allowed to clean the trumpet. And, you know, and you go, my God, what the hell's going on? And then finally, by year 7, you're allowed to play something, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then year 10, you're a master trumpeter. Now, you're a master trumpet. Now, you do the same thing if you do flower arrangement. Okay, you go through whatever 10 years or however long it is, the same methodology. Let's say I'm a flower arrangist master, and I say, I want to learn the trumpet. Very interesting. 1 year only. It's a, you know, it's totally logical. You say to yourself, what the fuck? How can it be, you know, you say it takes 10 years to learn the trumpet. Well, apparently it only takes 1 year. What takes 10 years is to train the mind. The assumption is that if you learned flower arranging, you learned something. You have the kind of mind that has the discipline, the humility, the, you know, the flexibility to learn something else. We've broken you already. Now you just need the technique. Okay, so do you see, you know, so in Japan, you know, of course, lots of people write books, don't get me wrong. It's like, you know, like everywhere else, you know, everybody likes to write a book and say, look at me, I published, and, you know, like Amazon sells me, you know, whatever, you know, of course. And it's also a way to reach people, you know, I'm not scoffing at it. But a lot of people sort of recognize that what they practice is something that really cannot be written.
Like yoga.
Exactly. So think of a book about yoga. And
I learned yoga with a book. I learned yoga through a book.
I know people who have. I know people who have.
Because I understood that there was a signature, a feeling signature on every asana. So knowing that, I was looking to find by intuition, by feeling, what was the signature. So with a bit of outside information. And so when I found a teacher, and then, oh, wow, that's fast.
Yes, that's very unusual. Most people are not looking for the what you would call the well, yeah, I would define it, you know, how do you find Tadasana or Samastitihi in every pose? How do you find that sense of I'm here and use your legs that way? Most people, it would never occur to them. Most people just try and get their leg behind their head. Okay, so it's a very unusual person that's looking for the signature in a pose. That's why most people need a teacher. You know, I know Chuck Miller said that he learned light on yoga from you know, from Mr. Iyengar, and apparently he did the whole damn book, which is incredible. And then he went to Patabi Joyce, and Patabi, you know, and he told Patabi, you know, Patabi Joyce asked him if he, you know, if he did yoga, and he said yes. And he said, "Who's your teacher?" He said, "I learned from this book." And he said, But interestingly enough, he obviously became a very high-level practitioner very, very fast. So Patabi Joyce didn't think that it was totally useless. But I think that there aren't that many books, and the books that there are often they're not as useful as one would like it to be, because it's hard. I think that's why, you know, thankfully in today's era, because we have, instead of books, we can do YouTube. so you can see what's going on.
Yes.
It's a lot, I think it's a much more effective way of communicating these styles than the books. But
It,
listen, there's tons of books. They're not always translated, but there's Fukaya has books. They all have books about point combinations that they use and stuff like that.
but that's not used. Yeah, yeah.
Not in English.
No, but I mean, for me, point combination is not. I'm not at that level. I'm really more. What's the thinking process? What's the logic? So I listened to your introduction, the first 2 hours and a half, and the following one. That's the level that is useful for me, because this gets deep.
Yeah. I would say then, now you've done the introduction, just go and take any of the other classes and you'll see, so you can see it applied on patients.
Perfect.
You really want to see patients, and then sometimes it's, it's what you guys call reverse engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Engineering is one way, reverse engineering is another. It's like, go from the patient back to the theory. Don't worry about the theory, worry about the patient.
Yes, and that's the reason why I developed so much distance from what I learned in school, because it didn't work with me. It didn't work with the way I see. It didn't work on. It only worked on one level, which is, it's great. It's a very simple model. I understand the benefit of the model, and I'm going to refer to that model at some time. And but that's it. It is not for on all other levels. The treatments didn't work. I mean, I understood the logic. The better taught the treatments were, because I used a lot of treatment in the context of the school, because I thought this was a good way of learning. And I felt that the impact of the treatment during the treatment, and then I felt my own body going back to where it was, because this is not the way to talk to me. It is too direct. It's imposing something on me. And I did the same thing with the Dr. Tan when I tried it. It's like, wow, this is even stronger. You want to shake me, but it did work. It did last for a moment, but I didn't want to go back. I don't want to be shaken. I want to be listened to. I want to dance. I don't want to fight. So. Yeah, so your introduction was fantastic, because you brought it that the style has to fit with, and this is where I was, that I cannot practice something that I don't. I can do other things than practice acupuncture also. I mean, but I'll do something that makes sense for every moment. And I was also looking at in the clinic, what will my day be made of? What type of interaction do I want? Yes, I want to talk, but I don't want to have the superficial talk. And I know I can access a different communication only through the body. That's why I choose that profession. Anyway, so you've been extremely right on, completely right on.
Good. I'm glad. All right. So enjoy your week. And good luck to you, Patrick. And if you need anything, just email me. And I will see you guys next week if you choose to come.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Most
Abby.
welcome. Bye.